Um, my name is Alyssa Rand, and I'm here representing Columbus Audubon. We're going to get started shortly. There are still people popping onto the call, so I am going to give it another couple minutes before we start our introduction here. All right, well, welcome everybody to our November Columbus Audubon speaker program brought to you jointly by Grange Insurance Audubon Center. We really appreciate their help with this series this year, so thank you to the staff there. It's been a really great joint effort. My name again is Alyssa Rand. I am on your Columbus Audubon board currently working on programs, and I just have a few announcements to share with you before I do our introductions of our speakers for this evening. Welcome again. Thank you for joining us virtually for these programs. First, we have a native plant backyard challenge going on currently. Well, registration is going on currently. We are looking for 100 homes in the central Ohio area to participate in a native plant backyard challenge to kind of create more of a native habitat for birds and pollinators and all kinds of native species to Ohio. Registration is now through mid-January, and there will be a kickoff at the end of January to start the program. You can get to the registration through either Columbus Audubon's website or Grange Insurance Audubon Center's website. Secondly, GIAC is having an event in December called the 12 Days of Audubon. It's a Yuletide celebration, and it's kind of a way to stay connected with Audubon while we all might be staying home more for the holidays. It's going to be 12 nights of online activities, and the registration includes like a box with things that complement each night of activities. The registration is going to start on December 1st, and you can get to that through Eventbrite and search for Grange Insurance Audubon Center. You'll be able to find it. I'm sure they'll put it out like on their Facebook too. The Columbus Audubon Bird Seed Sale is going to be December 7th through December 12th, and the link for ordering is going to be available on the Columbus Audubon website and our Facebook page on December 7th. New this year is that delivery is going to be available, and you'll find the details about how the delivery is going to work upon registration. Just a reminder that there is no program in December, so enjoy your holidays, and we will be back for our January program on January 26th. It will be a virtual program again, and we are hoping to have someone from Great Lakes Audubon Center, but if that does not happen, that's fine too. I'm sure we will bring you a very interesting and exciting program in January. As we go, if you do have questions for our speakers, if you could hold them till closer to the end of the program, and then you're going to type them in the chat. If you're not familiar with Zoom, if you go to the bottom of the screen, there's a bar and there's a little speech bubble type icon that says chat. And if you open that, you will be able to type your question into the box that appears on the right-hand side of your screen. And then at the end, when we have a question and answer portion, I will ask your questions to our presenters here. So we're going to hold those till closer to the end. So with that, I'm going to introduce our two speakers. Let's see. All right, tonight we would like to welcome Shana Byrd and Holly Latteman to our program on, let's see. They are going to be talking about building biodiversity and supporting bird populations in the face of climate change through native plant conservation. Shana is one of our speakers. She is the director of land conservation at Dawes Arboretum. And Shana received a bachelor's degree of science in environmental and plant biodiversity from Ohio University, and has been involved with natural resource management and education for the past 19 years. She has a master's of arts in zoology from the Global Field Program at Miami University, focusing on environmental stewardship and global conservation awareness. Her ecosystem restoration experience includes wetland enhancements, native prairie establishment, forest understory and reforestation, invasive species removal, and grassland habitat management. She spent about 9 years with the Wilds Restoration Ecology Program, and she also developed a formal natural resource management plan for the wilds. She additionally spent 4 years with a sustainable development organization called Rural Action Inc. and focused on outreach in community forestry. Currently, she is the director, as I said, of land conservation at the Dawes Arboretum, and she oversees management of the preserve's natural areas, which encompasses nearly 2,000 acres of woodlands, wetlands, meadows, and streams. Our second speaker tonight, Holly Latteman, is the conservation project manager at Dawes Arboretum. Holly received her Bachelor of Arts degree in zoology, sociology, anthropology, and environmental studies from Ohio Wesleyan, and a Master's of Science in Environmental Studies from Ohio University. Holly has a breadth of research experience studying feather degrading bacteria on yard birds, nest box species bacteria, phenology monitoring of various taxa, black vulture range expansion, and human wildlife conflict and avian presence in prairie rights of way. She has a passion for communicating conservation research effectively, and she demonstrates this by creating interpretive signage, innovative programming, and public outreach. Holly has served on numerous organizational committees and boards. She currently serves on the executive board of the Wild Ones Columbus and works to create engaging conservation programming for the Columbus area. As the conservation project manager at Dawes Arboretum, Holly works to promote native species conservation. She oversees over 6,500 native plant greenhouse and department propagation of species. She also works closely with the next generation of environmental professionals to prepare them for a career in the field. She works to restore landscapes through prairie and reforestation installments and maintenance on over 1,300 acres of natural areas. So between the two of them, lots of expertise in this field that I'm sure you're all excited for them to share with you. So without anything further, I would like to welcome our two guests, Shana Byrd and Holly Latteman.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. And I just want to say how excited I am to be here with you all this evening. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us. And we are just really thrilled to be able to have an opportunity to share with you how the Arboretum is focusing on growing healthier landscapes in the face of climate change, and also really having a main emphasis on strategic planning to ensure that we can conserve native plant populations into the future. And was mentioned, the Arboretum is a nearly 2,000 acre nonprofit conservation focused organization. For those of you who've never been there before, I highly recommend taking an opportunity to get out into some of these natural areas, see the different habitats, the wetlands, the woodlands, the grasslands, the forest. Just a really beautiful any time of year, and really where we have a lot of our focus on habitat enhancements, creating more robust, resilient, and biodiverse habitats for the species that depend on them. And in 1929, when the Arboretum was founded, it was with the emphasis to encourage the planting of trees and ornamental plantings to demonstrate their value for both practical purposes as well as for scientific research. Where there was a particular emphasis on the plants and trees that would be able to be supported in the climate of the state of Ohio. Well, little did our founders know that when the Arboretum was established, we would be facing some pretty substantial changes to Ohio's climate. And as I think most of us are aware, we are already seeing some of the impacts of this extreme weather. We see this day to day at the Arboretum. For example, we're already witnessing longer growing seasons. We are now experiencing wetter summers and longer autumns and wetter autumns. Because our winters are not as cold, it is not allowing trees to experience full dormancy, which is problematic because trees need that time to rest and recuperate, and actually causes them to decline over time. We're also seeing situations where we're having false springs and causing plants to force buds, which then results in the fruit failing for the season, which obviously is detrimental to the wildlife populations that would also depend on the fruit production for that season. We're also seeing more intense and more frequent storms and stormwater damage and events as a result, stormwater erosion. So along with that being the increased flooding and drought, and even high wind events that are associated with these storms, because they cause significant tree canopy damage, which then has a cascading effect on the understory by then promoting oftentimes invasive species to occupy those disturbed places. And as a result of these changes, particularly in precipitation, we're seeing an increase in pathogens and other pests, and often associated with high humidity conditions. And for some species, even those that might benefit from increased precipitation, we are also within those same seasons experiencing extreme heat. And so causing these plants to experience drought stress on top of all of these other factors they're really making it a challenge for our ecosystems to become resilient in such a short period of time that we're seeing these results. So if you think about public gardens, arboreta, they're really a perfect natural setting in which horticulture, conservation, our operations, and our overall emphasis for strategic direction moving forward can synergize in order for us to be more effective and efficient in our planning. because we are all experiencing these changes that I referenced. And a few of the different ways that we're doing that are by enhancing the biodiversity on the preserve itself, with this particular emphasis on promoting native trees and habitats, and of course the wildlife species that depend on them. And equally, if not more important, is inspiring that community involvement for individuals to not just to appreciate the beauty that that you see when you experience these habitats at the Arboretum, but also to become involved personally and to want to be inspired to be a part of the conservation solution. So part of our focus and our emphasis is on what does sustainability look like for the future, and it requires us to ask questions about how we plan in practical ways to be more intentional about applying conservation practices. And for a large part of our focus is on ecological research, long-term ecological research, and really looking at and exploring how native plants can be part of the solution for future functional and resilient landscapes. Within our 17,000 labeled specimens that are what create our living collections on the grounds, these are also utilized as a living laboratory, if you will, because they are monitored for health and vigor and decline. And that's what helps us direct our future plantings. But again, also we share that information with the public. And a good example of this is the blue spruce. I imagine that many of you have a blue spruce in your own landscape. I know I do. They're a beautiful tree. And because they are so prolific in a landscape setting, some of the impacts of climate change that we're directly seeing are something that are going to affect many people. Due to the high humidity and the increase in precipitation that I referenced earlier, it's causing the spread of a really destructive fungus called Rhizophora. And it's creating a condition called needle cast disease, in which, as you can see, the lower branches begin to lose their foliage. And that condition will continue until the whole tree goes into decline. And so part of the benefit of an arboretum in having 17,000 labeled living specimens for research purposes is to be able to explore which are the alternative species that one might be able to choose. And so as you can see here in this article that was written and provided to our membership, there are a number of different candidate trees that we are evaluating, and then again making recommendations for species they may be considered a viable alternative in the face of climate change. Within our living collections, we also have this major emphasis, as I mentioned, on native plant conservation. So we have 235 native plants accessioned that are either of federally listed or state listed species of concern. So threatened, rare, endangered. We do work with the critically endangered Torreya taxifolia, which is ex situ or a conservation arrangement in which the propagation of that plant and the conservation of it, meaning outside of its natural original range, native range. But the purpose in doing so is essentially a genetic arc so that that plant material can still survive regardless of future conditions in its original range. The purpose here is to conserve those local species with the ideal goal of potentially repatriating some of these propagules back into their original native habitats where they were originally collected from the wild sustainably. We call that plants of wild known origin, or WKO. So what that involves is seed collections throughout the southern ecotype ranges. And this is really a strategy of assisted migration and as I said, genetic repository. We do know that we expect the climate to look more like the kind of conditions that we see in the South in Ohio in the future as climate change continues to impact our landscapes. What this involves is an emphasis by the land conservation team in partnership with our curatorial and horticulture team to collect native plants from the southern reaches of Ohio and actually extend into what we refer to as the ecoregion of the Ohio River Valley. And again, by doing this, we're essentially taking those same species that are native to Ohio, but these are southern ecotypes that are better adapted and more well adapted to conditions that we're starting to see. And so this allows us to do applied restoration research through reforestation planting. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. But again, conserve those species and their population, and then also, as I mentioned, evaluate them for landscapes. And so our horticultural team and the curatorial team is reaching even further south and looking at new species that are potentially native to southern states, may not necessarily be native to Ohio, but native to the US, and evaluating those species as their potential for landscape plantings. What this also has allowed us to do is contribute to species conservation, as I mentioned, for threatened and rare species. I'll use viburnum molly as an example, a shrub species found at very few locations in Ohio, where we have been successful in growing that plant on and propagating it with, again, the ideal hope to be able to return to the original location from where it was collected. The need for doing that has to do with threats to its original habitat. This instance in particular, the site where the seed was collected is essentially being overrun by invasive species and outcompeted by honeysuckle. So that's part of how we're contributing to conservation, as well as selling, and I'm sorry, not selling, but sharing rather, our native seeds with other conservation-based organizations, so that they too can grow those on, or assisting with propagation of difficult to grow material for other institutions. For example, growing Angelica artipurpurea with Holden Arboretum as our partner institution. And from this, we're trying to take insights and again share that out with the public to have a broader conservation impact. And that's not just with our fellow institutions, but also with public and private agencies. So for example, we collaborate with the Ohio Department of Transportation, and as well the American Electric Power and Electric Power Research Institute, AEP and EPRI, on research that can facilitate native plant solutions in working landscapes and really try to provide best management and recommendations. Why would we do that? The reason we do that is because we really are committed to supporting future landscapes and natural area restoration, and we really believe that native plants are part of that solution. So how do we get these plants from the wild into our nursery? Well, it starts off by looking at where their original ranges are. We do our homework, and then it takes a village. We essentially go out to these natural areas and collect the species from their known locations. Of course, it does require appropriate planning, appropriate permits and permission, in particular when you're referring to species that may be species of concern, threatened, rare, endangered species. And then we rely heavily on the herbarium as a tool to provide evidence of historical known locations. And this is significant because herbarium records serve a very specific purpose of letting us know exactly where that plant was at one point in time, allowing us to go back to that area in the future. So that's exactly what we do. Essentially, based on those herbarium records, we will locate by county and road, and often in rural locations, where those known locations are. And then we'll partner with various agencies, both state and federal. Vinton Furnace is an example of one of those partners, and then make small, sustainable collections on those natural areas, and then bring those back to the Arboretum for propagation. So this is what that collection looks like in the field. This was actually a collection at the Vinton Experimental Forest, and you can see that data collection is actually a very important part of this process, because that is essentially what feeds back into the herbarium records. So as you can see, we're collecting basic information, the name of the plant, of course, but the state and locality where it was collected. You'll notice that we're collecting habitat notes, basic information such as whether or not the collection is an annual, a perennial, a tree, or a shrub, and then information about the flowers, the fruits, and the type of material that was collected, whether it was seeds or cuttings, and if it did include an herbarium specimen, which it always should. Another important aspect is the provenance, and so I'll just highlight that here, and you'll see W is for wild, and that's important because In order to truly conserve plants for the future, we're really interested in the genetic material from wild known populations as opposed to nursery grown stock. The reason being that a lot of that nursery grown material is vegetatively propagated, so essentially does not allow for more of that genetic plasticity and resilience to be built in, and then it sets those plants up to potential pests and disease from plants that are closely related. So this is what it looks like in the field. This is an actual field press, and so the plants, the vouchers that will go along with the seed accessions are collected in the field. You see here some of our environmental professional residents having an opportunity to learn alongside our professional staff. Here pictured is David Brandenburg, our taxonomic botanist, and giving them great firsthand experience while collecting those herbarium specimens. From there, does look something like that picture you see up in the left-hand corner when we come back from these collection trips. And then we process them, begin the drying, and then mounting. And that's when it becomes a formal part of our record-keeping system, which then is available to other institutions as well who are interested in research and understanding where those plants were collected from. And that's one of the values of the Arboretum, one of many, is the fact that we have a working herbarium. And what I mean by that is these specimens don't get filed away and never seen again. They're actually actively used to help teach the next generation about botany, which is becoming less and less of an opportunity in institutions of higher education. It is simply not being taught in a hands-on, practical way. And so having the Arboretum with the capacity to invite in early career professionals for a chance to learn alongside our staff, I think is really a value that the Arboretum offers to conservation as a whole. Once we have all of our material, we really rely very heavily on a core of dedicated volunteers who then help us process all that seed. And as you can see, it's quite an operation. And for every type of seed that you might have, you're going to have a different way of processing it, storing it, and then stimulating it to germinate. It really is unique to each species, and really sort of a treasure hunt to learn the best practices to get those plants to produce germination. From there, they'll hang out often in our walk-in cooler. It's what you see up here on the left-hand side of your screen. And essentially, those plants hang out in a cool condition, which is meant to stimulate them, trick them into thinking that they've spent some time in winter, which essentially breaks the dormancy and signals to the plant that it's time to set out roots. Then the plants will journey into our propagation facilities, as you see here, propagation houses. And this is a sort of a one seed's journey. You can see here by the label, it's been provided that it was a wild collected plant. And from there, it begins its germination, starts to sprout its radicle and first leaves. And then it often, ideally becomes part of our either living collection or it goes into our natural area restoration projects. And so you can see here, these plants are grown in the greenhouse, but then they spend time in the lower right-hand part of our propagation facility called the lath house. And what happens in the lath house is it's an open air structure meant to provide moderate shade, a degree of wind and rain and natural conditions to allow those plants to harden off before they are then planted out into natural habitats or our living collections. And we do have a special greenhouse that is dedicated to native plant conservation for the purpose of habitat restoration, and then also making that plant material available to the public. And Holly's going to tell you a little bit more about what that looks like. And Holly also oversees the daily operation of this fabulous greenhouse, and which, as was mentioned, is now home to 6,500 plants that we can't wait to get in the ground and or into the hands of the people who want to build habitat in their own backyard. What the plants look like when they get into our reforestation projects is a little something like this. Again, engaging the community to come out, help us plant trees. Our aim is to reforest exhausted agricultural soils, in other words, soil that has just been row cropped year after year. Even with rotation, that soil loses organic matter and loses, it becomes compacted. And so the goal is to rebuild those soils over time as well through creative habitat restoration techniques such as planting prairie. I'll share a little bit more about what that looks like as well. So we don't just plant prairie, or we don't just reforest. We actually have wetlands, we have understory woodlands, and this really creates an opportunity for us to experiment in a wide variety of different sites for the species that belong there or could be added to enhance biodiversity, and then thereby improving habitat for the wildlife that depend on those sites. You might wonder, wouldn't it be better to just let those habitats be, just protect them, right? Well, oftentimes these sites have been impacted. They've been degraded to a degree, whether that be by invasive species or, with the example of agriculture, a really active conversion. And so there are instances where there's a limited ability to recover of that ecosystem without intervention. And so ecosystem restoration is the answer to that. For example, in this agricultural field, if left to succeed or go through the process of natural succession on its own, it takes time to achieve the biodiverse, healthy, mature forest you see on the right-hand side of the screen here. And so our aim and our goal is to accelerate that process of recovery by actively replacing the species that belong there. Because what we have also found is with the incidence and increase of invasive species, if you don't plan for what you want, you might be planning for what you don't want. And what I mean by that is, as you can see by this table here, this is an example of the 15 most commonly observed non-native plant species in Ohio and forested plots throughout the state. And as you'll notice, certainly plants that you wouldn't want to be succeeding in a site that was left to lay fallow or was an abandoned agricultural field. But you know that you will certainly have some of these species if not planned for. If we don't actively restore lands, we are likely to encounter non-native species. It has sort of become the reality as invasive species have had greater and greater impacts. So it is necessary to reforest and to replant native species, especially in cases where the native seed bank is missing, for example, in ag lands or other highly disturbed lands, such as rights-of-ways or even in coal mining operations. And so you might be thinking to yourself, do you really need to plant red maple? I mean, that stuff just shows up everywhere, right? Well, in this case, you'll see, if you look at the top native species, 35 most commonly observed plants in those same plots throughout Ohio's forests. These are plants that, may be common species in forests, but they're not necessarily commonly available in nurseries. And so this highlights the need for the Arboretum and other institutions practicing ecosystem restoration to actually procure that seed and propagate it and then grow it on for the purposes of rebuilding these habitats that have been impacted by disturbance and degradation. So each year we have a goal of reforesting a portion of the Arboretum. Approximately 1/3 of the property has experienced agriculture at some time, and so each year we will convert a portion of that agricultural land to a native habitat. And so we could not do this alone. We rely heavily on the community and our volunteers to make that happen. And over the past several seasons, we've planted 5,500 trees within these reforestation research plots, which is equal to approximately 14 acres of potential insight that allows us to learn how we might approach the next planting project. We learn through a process called adaptive management. And so what I mean by that is it's a method within ecological restoration that allows us to continually evaluate our process. So for example, we don't just plant trees and keep our fingers crossed and hope they all live. we, as a matter of fact, go out and count each one of those trees and see who survived and who didn't. And that gives us great insight as we evaluate and monitor what species we should be adding into a future reforestation site based on the conditions and the reference ecosystem that we're relying on to help inform what plantings would be appropriate there. And that's exactly what the circumstance was at our Red Barn reforestation site, which I'll share with you as just one example of our reforestation efforts. One of the other challenges we have is mimicking a natural forest. If you think about it, there's plenty of information out there academically and professionally about how to grow trees as a crop. In other words, growing timber. And essentially you'll see those plantings done often in orchard style, essentially in rows, and they very much look like a crop, and that's done for efficiency. But it does not necessarily mimic a natural forest, and those rows that are planted do not go away over time. And so part of what we're experimenting with is how do we maintain the ability to manage within these sites and have some predictability about their spacing, but in ways that more reflect what a natural system would look like. And so as you can see with the diagram here, the circles and the ovals in the middle represent a more mature tree, where the other symbols you would see around that tree would be younger species and also shrub species to essentially create that shrub layer that is naturally seen in a forest setting and accelerates the process of recovery. The project that I'm referencing was planted in 2015 over 7 acres. And the reference ecosystem we utilized was a nearby forested wetland, affectionately called the red maple swamp. And we selected 17 species of trees and shrub for the reforestation and planted 3,000 trees with the help of 100 volunteers. It was a really wonderful effort and just gave a great opportunity for not just members of our community, but also high school students and university students to get out there and learn about the process of restoration. So that's the project you see pictured here, and the foreground is the planting and the background is the reference ecosystem, the red maple swamp. So if you're interested in seeing this, you can come to the Arboretum and visit the Red Barn Reserve, which is actually free and open to the public anytime. That same project was really emphasizing how do we learn from each of these plantings so that the next time we approach it, a reforestation site, we can become more efficient, not just effective in growing the trees, but how do we become more efficient in managing them and maintaining them? So part of our goal there was to evaluate different land management approaches with increasing degrees of intensity. And so as you can see here in this first section A, it was a multi-step mow, a string trim, and a hand pull around each one of those trees. So quite a bit of effort compared to the section B, which was mowing and string trimming only. And finally, in section C, those trees were maintained with a mow only. And again, the goal here was to see, with increasing degrees of effort, do you get an increase in return on that investment of time and people and resources? And so what we found was, in essence, the plot that had the highest survival was the string and the mow and the string trim plot at 78% survival, whereas section C had the second lowest survival, but as you can see, not significantly. So this was mow only, the least amount of effort. And so it just went to show it didn't justify the extra time it took to implement those extra measures, even if they did result in slightly higher survival. And so this is what I'm referring to when I say we use the Arboretum as a living laboratory to help us be more efficient and more effective in our restoration. And why does that matter? Because we want to share that information with the public and with others who are interested in restoring natural landscapes to again gain from our insights and our successes and the failures that we see, and hopefully helping everyone be more successful. So, and as we're doing this, the climate's changing on us. So a big part of what we do in our planning is to select species based on the most current data available of the species that are predicted to do well. So the climate hardy species, as well as those that are predicted to be sensitive to the climate changes that we're seeing. And so this is a strategy we're evaluating in our natural areas. And I'll give you an example of a study site that's looking at this question. And what you see pictured here are various plantings of select species that are either climate hardy or climate sensitive, and indicated by the color and number that you see there. And the planting design, very different, as you can see from the original that I showed you, is these are in islands, planting islands of blocks of 100 trees. So there's no mowing taking place in between those trees, but there is mowing on the outer perimeter to limit the invasion of woody species and invasive species that we see happen with non-management. So what did we find? It was an interesting result in that we did see the lowest degree of survival in the sensitive species, the predicted to be sensitive species, slightly higher in the intermediate species, and the highest survival in the hardy species. So this may not seem like much of a surprise because these are the predicted species, but we're still very early on in the study. This is an example of what those species are, or a listing of what each of those species are. And so you can see those that are listed as sensitive and hardy. And then what we did was evaluate survival per island. And that was an interesting result in that we did see, for the most part, fairly consistent survival across sites. So overall survival of species, with one exception, which you can see there as plot 5 at only 51% survival. But interestingly enough, that site is very wet. And so what we can see is that the site conditions are right now a greater predictor of success and survival than climate hardiness. So at the end of the day, it's really too soon to be drawing conclusions. This is a very young study, but it's an example of how we are utilizing the Arboretum as an ecosystem lab, if you will, to help make more informed decisions about how to restore ecosystems in the future. And another technique that we're employing in light of the increases in precipitation are really built in operationally. So for example, that has to often do with decisions we might make in infrastructure. And an example of that would be the installation of a green roof, demonstration green roof on the shed you see pictured there, as well as we've begun installing retention bioswales to handle stormwater that would be otherwise heavily flowing off of impervious surfaces such as pavement and then eroding soil, but instead are now serving as pollinator habitat, and also adding to aesthetic beauty and showing that there's a way to deal with stormwater that adds value to a landscape and offers a practical solution. We've also had to deal with the reality of adjusting our watering regimes, and by that I mean watering more. Even though we're having all of this precipitation, we are also having extreme drought. And so with that, we've had to adjust some of the planting dates as well based on the conditions that we're seeing on the ground. So whether we're talking about extreme drought or extreme water, we often find that prairie has a deep-rooted solution, if you will, pun intended there. As you can see from the diagram, the numbers are tiny on the scale, but they're essentially measuring that some of the species of native grasses and forbs have extensive, robust root systems that can reach the depths of 12 feet. And that's substantial, because if you look way over to the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see something that just sort of looks like chicken scratch, and that's actually meant to represent lawn. That is the extent of above ground biomass and below ground biomass that your typical lawn, non-native, cool season grasses occupy. So about 6 inches depth of root mass. So you can see how this is certainly an opportunity for soil conservation, stormwater retention, and not to mention all of the beautiful habitat that's created. So why else should we plant prairie? Well, it is the most endangered large ecosystem in North America. So that's another great reason. And most of it is gone, unfortunately. In Ohio, 99% of the original prairie habitat has been lost to habitat destruction and may likely never be a prairie again. So we really find that it is a natural and obvious solution to both habitat destruction and loss that's happened over time, and it also serves as this resilient landscape in the face of climate change. We know this application of using native plants in functional landscape works because we've had an opportunity to apply it at different scales and also across different industries. So, for example, I mentioned highly degraded sites such as coal surface mines or abandoned mine lands. And now with the Arboretum collaborating with American Electric Power, we're exploring the use of native seed mixes and construction sites to create regional prairie as habitat, but also provide practical solutions in areas that have been disturbed. So what we do know is development's not stopping anytime soon. To an extent, growth of population and habitat destruction is inevitable. However, we choose to see this as a native plant restoration opportunity. Anytime there's a soil disturbance that's created, stormwater regulations already require that site to be reseeded. And so this is a perfect opportunity to see native plants as a solution to that issue, because if you want to know what's currently done, non-native species are seeded within those sites, and non-natives are not better when it comes to creating wildlife habitat because they're low diversity sites with very few, if any, floral resources, so not helpful for pollinators. And as I showed you earlier, certainly not significant or even comparative to the robust root systems that help rebuild soil over time. And so we believe there's a better way. What I'm showing you here is that better way in a research plot taking place at the Arboretum. This is a power line research project in which you could see the destructive woody vegetation that was there, most of which was non-native, has to be removed because it is not just problematic, it is actually a safety concern from a line maintenance standpoint. So once that site is disturbed, we've demonstrated that those sites can then be reseeded with a native prairie seed mix. As you can see here, this is very early in the establishment, but it's already succeeding. And we know that because we can go back out there and count, and we've seen 84% of the species that were in the original seed mix have established and been persistent over time within these plots. We also saw success in the effectiveness of erosion control, which really matters from a business case and a practical standpoint for companies that might consider this restoration technique. And we saw 80% coverage in advance of the required deadline. So less than 4 weeks, we saw plant coverage, which protected the soil. So certainly part of our conservation strategy moving forward, we see that native plants can produce equal, if not better results than non-native plants. We also see that not only are they serving a functional purpose, but they're providing wonderful habitat for the wildlife that utilize these corridors. We're still gathering the data from 2020, the field season, so I already know that these numbers will increase in the additional species we've seen utilizing these right-of-way corridors. So certainly adding greater functional habitat that has otherwise been lost throughout the state. At the end of the day, our goal is, it's about restoring native diversity to our landscapes, both working landscapes, both natural areas, and also everyone's backyard. And this is where I want to take an opportunity to share with you some insights from Holly, because she has some information she would like to share with you about how the Arboretum is adding to sustainable landscapes on a broader scale by actually engaging our communities and inspiring them to be part of the solution. And you imagine the scale that we can achieve if we can actually enlist the help of everyone across the state of Ohio.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. So one of the ways that Dawes really promotes what we're doing and what Shana has talked about for the last few minutes here is with the Ohio Sustainable Landscape Series. It's a series where we bring in folks who have experience with this, as well as our staff presents, getting the word out, sharing what we've learned, sharing what one can do in their own personal backyard. Really a great series and a great way that we connect with folks. And so another way we do that is through the Green Belt Initiative. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Doug Tallamy's book, Bringing Nature Home, really a standard among conservationists. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Put it on your Christmas wish list this year. Talking about how to bring native plants into our own landscapes. And, you know, we see these wonderful areas. We saw some of the beautiful photos that Shana posted here earlier. And we go to these areas and see, well, they're doing all this prairie and they're doing these reforestation projects, and that's great. But how do I do that in my own yard? You know, I might just have grass or some common, like a blue spruce or something like that. How do I get these valuable ecosystem valuable plants in my yard? Really one of our big goals of our department. And so as I was talking about what's wrong with a conventional yard. So this is a quintessential house here with some, you know, nice spruce trees there, shrubs under the window, nice grass. But as a pollinator, I don't see a lot of quality there. I see maybe some nice nesting habitats in those bushes and shrubs there. But I don't see a lot of food resources, right? If I'm a bee, there's really not a whole lot of pollinator resources there in that grass. And so why not make this an oasis for them? And so that brings me to one of my loves, of course, is our Byrds of Ohio. And as we all, I'm sure, can identify here, we've got a nice little house wren up at the top left-hand corner going clockwise. We've got a blue jay, a cardinal, and a cedar waxwing. And in these photos, we can see that the cedar waxwing is on a shrub there with some berries. We've got the blue jay that looks like he's on a plant with some berries as well. The house wren there, that you can see the twig in the back. I'm imagining him picking off some twigs for his nest. These are really the resources that we're talking about, and putting those into your yard and how we can get that there. So how we describe this for folks and really get them to understand what they can do is we split it up into resource categories. So what can we add in our yard that has fruits, seeds, nuts, maybe a water feature or a nectar feature? So if you think about your yard, if you think about yourself as a bird or a bee or a pollinator, what does your yard have to provide? And these are exactly what I'm talking about when I say resource categories. And so oaks are hugely important. I'm sure that we all know the importance of oaks, but that's something that we really try to bestow on the public is plant an oak tree. If you do nothing else, plant an oak tree. Oak trees have so many caterpillars, which we tell folks that, you know, most nestlings, even those who are seedivores, really rely on insects for the first few days of development, getting that extra protein source. And oaks will provide that for mama bird that's trying her best to raise those nestlings. Oaks can really provide her with a quick resource. So here we have an oak and a picture there, and some homeowners might be upset that we see this, you know, browsing on that leaf. Well, really, that's really a wonderful thing, because that means that caterpillars are visiting your tree. So we encourage browsing, and we encourage those, if you will, damaged, quote unquote, leaves. They're not damaged, they're just full with caterpillars. And one oak tree can have over 550 species of caterpillars on that, and just really wonderful. So something that we try to bestow on folks is intentionality with design. You know, get a piece of paper out, draw your yard, draw your house, talk about what you want for resource categories, look at your soil, what's wet, where's my driveway, what's dry, what's taller than another, what's a bottom swale, and really be intentional about where you want to add in those prairie plants or those native plants. And so another way to be intentional is to do mass species plantings. And so you can see here several groups of the same species. So we've got a nice group of Liatris back there, sweet brown-eyed Susan, Echinacea. Really makes this a beautiful, picturesque planting and really would be beautiful in your yard. And something we also encourage folks to do is tall in the back, short in the front. Just like we're lining up for a photo, think of your plants the same way. We want those Joe Pye in the back, small in the front. You want to be able to see all your hard work. And so you might be thinking, okay, well, now where do I go to find these plants? We have a plant sale and we offer some of those plants that Shana was talking about and showed you in our greenhouse. I can promise you they all are grown with so much love. And Ernst Conservation also has seed. If you're looking to, create a prairie in your yard, or you've got one spot that is a problem spot, you don't know what to do, go ahead and look through their website. They've got great resources and something that we use when we plant our prairies. Scioto Gardens, also they're in Delaware, great resource, wealth of information. And so in order to change, it really requires a paradigm to have the flexibility and adaptability to the weather and the climate of Ohio as well and into the future. And so we use our resources and our research that we have in order to affect our decisions for the next year, for the next 5 years. We're constantly doing that adaptive management and working with the public to show them and showcase our work, as well as provide research and knowledge-based decisions that they can do in their own yard. And with that, I would like to say thank you to everyone for coming tonight. It's been a wonderful chance to meet you all virtually. If you have any other questions, please contact us, our website, the Dawes Arboretum, and contact us at the Conservation Department if you have any questions. We are happy to answer them. And with that, I am going to stop my screen share. And I think Alyssa is going to join us for some.
Yeah, all right. I'm going to go ahead and take your questions. So if you have not put them in the chat already, if you were holding them, go ahead and start putting them in the chat. There already are a couple, so I'm going to start at the beginning here. So we have a question about in coordination with ODOT, have you done promoting native plantings in the outer edges of highways versus highway medians because of butterfly fatalities due to cars when the plantings are in that middle section?
I would love to answer that question. It's a great question, and I can tell you that there is actually research currently underway to help address that question. So what it highlights is that oftentimes we are operating under assumptions and not necessarily facts. But what some of the studies that have been done, and there need to be more, suggest that there are patterns to traffic wildlife interactions. And what that means is that some studies suggest that high traffic and low traffic roads have less fatalities than intermediate traffic. You know, not necessarily the conclusion that I would have drawn, but of course we have to have the research that helps support that. By knowing that, we can prioritize plantings that are in high traffic and low traffic areas. And other studies suggest that while there are some wildlife species, insects in particular, that might be more prone to collision or impact with vehicles, for the most part, the benefits of creating additional habitat and the additional reproduction that can happen as a result of creation of more habitat far outweighs the incidence of loss that you may have from potential crash fatalities with insects. So what I would say is, research is the answer, and that's exactly why we want to help contribute to that and be part of helping answer some of these questions, and doing it with real world data that can support our decisions moving forward.
All right, and then we have a question. Are there any long-term possibilities of green corridors between Dawes and Licking River to the west?
Interesting. Actually, we have a tributary, the Dutch Fork stream, that actually flows through the Arboretum property and is part of an annual tradition of stream riparian corridor restoration through removal of debris, and is the focus of one of our habitat restoration goals. We partner with multiple folks in Licking County through the Licking River Roundup. And that's just one way in which we are enhancing riparian corridors and connections. I'm trying to think specifically of the area that's in reference. If you want to provide more detail or follow up with me afterwards, I'd be happy to talk about that. One thing I can say is, whether we directly own land that we have influence on, which is an example of the River Roundup collaboration, where we directly affect that change on that landscape, or whether it's support that we can lend through a partnership, we're interested in doing that. And so, yeah, I'd like to talk more with the person who asked that question.
All right, great. I have a question about when is your plant sale?
I'm gonna let Holly take that.
Yeah, sure thing. So this past year we had 2 plant sales. So we have a spring plant sale and a fall plant sale. This past fall plant sale was in September, and I believe the spring one was in April. And so keep a lookout on our website and our social medias for those dates. This year we did a virtual plant sale, which was highly successful and quite fun to be able to offer a few more days. But in non-pandemic life, we do an in-person plant sale where we really get to talk with folks. But I would say the best way to keep on that is to check our website close to spring, as well as our social medias, and just keep for more communication. It does change from year to year, so.
The next question is, do you all believe, will the term native change meaning as climate change leaves its mark? So will the designation of native be relevant going forward if the climate change conditions of a region are permanently altered?
That's a really interesting question about change through time. And one thing I want to just draw back to is the Arboretum record, and just the importance of how that essentially establishes us with a historic understanding of original vegetation populations. And we can draw what we can from the original, pre-European settlement understanding of what Ohio and other landscapes looked like prior to the massive changes that took place as a result of European settlement. So we've already seen, it was a different transformation of the landscape, but certainly the anthropogenic impacts have been very real in defining the success or failure of plants, and then also, of course, helping facilitate their movement, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And it's a hot debate as to what is essentially, or are natives, can natives be invasive? Essentially we do have an understanding of where plants originated from, and it's really based on the scientists that came before, who essentially defined this is what the current vegetation is, and thank goodness for that, because that essentially helps provide us with an understanding of how those vegetation communities will change through time.
All right, great. Our next question, I believe, is maybe for Holly. It says, does it matter what kind of oak you plant? Are some species better?
So absolutely. It does matter based on your landscape, whether or not which oak to plant, essentially. So some oaks are more water loving, Some oaks are more dry species. It really just depends on your habitat. I don't know, Shana, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that's a good take on it, and there's a lot of there's research to support the fact that, of course, natives have co-evolved with the pollinators that depend on them, whereas non-natives haven't. And so that's ironically in the example that Holly provided of what some landowners may interpret as damage should actually be a celebration because those plants are providing a feast and really not doing any long-term harm to those plants, or the oaks being a specific one, and the caterpillar damage. But I think it has to do more with nativity and your site, just like you said.
Awesome.
I have someone that wants to get a look at the plant identifications / sensitivity and hardiness slide real quick again. They maybe wanted to copy it down.
Yeah, I can bring that up while we take the next question.
Sure. And the next question is, how do we go about finding a professional landscaper who understands these concepts that you've presented to help us begin this kind of transition in their yard?
Well, while Shana's finding that, I can provide a little bit of insight into that. I would just ask your landscaper or your companies that you choose what they'll seed with, if they'll seed with native plants, and if it's a matter of doing the work, I would say like the physical work I'm thinking of, because we might not all be able to do that. I would say create an outline of what you want and choose your plants, and then provide that outline for them. And I would believe that they would be able to use those plants. And if it's just a matter of digging, I would think that they could be able to dig that, work with them, to have them have an understanding of what you're trying to do, as well as, have to promote the native plants and see what their take is, and see if they are, knowledgeable about that, or if their knowledge lies elsewhere. I would encourage the conversation.
The only thing I'll add to that is, and this is true in any industry will respond to consumer demand, if you will. And so that is exactly what we need, is more people asking for native beneficial landscapes. And by doing so, that creates a demand which will automatically be supported by those who recognize, hey, there's a specialization there. And there are obviously companies that do specialize in exactly that installation of native landscapes. But that is exactly what we're trying to aim for, is making it the norm as opposed to, something unique and different. And it's just, I always sort of have to chuckle myself because it's ironic, right? These are the plants that actually belong here in Ohio. And yet it seems novel and, innovative to be adding them back to where perhaps they once were. So I think it's just a paradigm shift, and Holly kind of touched on that, exactly that. We just really have to recognize our dependence on native ecosystems, not just for our own health, but for the health of wildlife too.
And if you have questions on, specific plants, if you're going through plant sale, when that time comes and you've got some questions, feel free to reach out to us. We can help, with, I wouldn't say the design because it's your house, but maybe suggesting a plant or two that might suit well in your area, or if you have a wet spot or a dry spot, things like that.
We have in the past hosted workshops to help with individual design, but as Holly suggested, it really takes a heavy participation by a homeowner to have a vision and to decide what kind of landscape they want, and then working together with those that are knowledgeable, you can aim for the oasis you want to create.
All right, I have a question from David. If someone wanted to start a small prairie area in their yard, what would a small area be that would be successful in establishment to help wildlife, like square footage wise? What would be actually beneficial?
Well, so that's a great question, actually. And, hopefully you're going to like the answer because, and it is actually true, and research supports is no prairie is too small. And the reason being that if you think about it, it can be a food desert, if you will, for pollinators. So even by providing a small scale garden planting of transplanted plugs of plants, there's an adage, if you build it, they will come. You will have that experience of, as soon as you provide those resources in your landscape, you will be able to witness butterflies, bees, beneficial insects, birds coming to them like a magnet, even if you have 4 or 5 native plants that just didn't exist there before. So the answer is start small, make it appropriate to your area. I often advocate planting transplants, especially if you're, it helps with, gives instant gratification. If you start with seed, it can absolutely be done. You can have great success. There's just some things you need to take into consideration to reduce weed pressure in the early years while it's establishing. It takes a few years for it to establish. So the answer is just get started, start planting.
I can actually answer the next question about this presentation being available online. It is either going to be posted on our respective websites, CA and GIAC, or emailed to participants that registered, or both. And then, what is the best way to prepare an area to start prairie seed? Would you recommend spraying a broadleaf herbicide or a safe herbicide for that specific area to work best to remove existing vegetation? This person worked as a seasonal land steward for a park district, and to start native prairie areas, they are knowledgeable about herbicides.
Yeah, so that is half the answer right there. So I think it's really going to be unique to each individual, because obviously if you are going to use herbicides, you want to do that safely as possible and as judiciously as possible. But they certainly can be effective and targeted. And so we do utilize them as a tool in our resource toolbox, especially if you're going to be converting any area of scale. It simply isn't practical to lay out, black liner plastic on 5 acres. And so sometimes it is the tool that is available to us depending on how big of a project we're tackling. But I would say if someone was to tackle a smaller area, honestly, one of my favorite techniques, if you would like to avoid using herbicide, it's a passive technique that takes time, but it works great, is to utilize a very thick material. Rolled rubber roofing works really great, and essentially can be laid down on, I mow the area to as short as it will go, but essentially it can be laid down, but it has to stay in place for about a year. But the nice thing about it is it's low profile, it doesn't blow away. Black plastic, if you've ever done it, it tends to shred in the winter, and mixed success is what I've seen with that. But the rolled rubber roofing is dense, it's thick, it doesn't blow away, and it holds out moisture, and is very effective in just basically creating a bare spot that you can then plant into.
Great. I have a question from Elaine. Do you have any tips for protecting planted tree seedlings from being destroyed by raccoons, skunks, deer?
Holly sees me laughing because, yeah, I mean, the struggle is real. And that's actually, I didn't go into a lot of our other reforestation research, but that's a research question that we've actually explored, is herbivory deterrence. And so we absolutely have the same challenges, and have, whether it be deer, whether it be mice, moles, voles, girdling the base of the tree, especially if there's tall vegetation that surrounds it. So we use tree tubes. They are effective. They will give that tree a chance to, jumpstart a 2 or 3 year growth season, but they do have a disadvantage too, in that the tree will grow tall and straight and vigorous, but yet when you take the crutches off, if you will, of the tree tube, then you can tend to have a leggy tree that is weak and not wind strong. So taking it off at the right time is really important too, and allowing that tree to, essentially, we cage our trees. We actually use a woven wire and create essentially a cage that is whatever the diameter is appropriate for that tree, maybe 2 feet, maybe 3 feet, and then use rebar to hold it in place. It's very effective, and from far away, you can't really notice it. That's for mostly for deer.
Great. And it does look like as registrants, you definitely will get a video recording of this presentation. And then could we potentially see the previous slide to this one showing the hardy plants and one listing the sensitive plants? Yeah, I think that must be it.
I will say the research that we're relying on is is produced by the Tree Atlas, and so you know, certainly there are a ton of great researchers doing that work, and we rely on, you know, doing that background research to just see what the predicted species are. I would so that's freely available on the website. You can you should be able to locate a very comprehensive list of species and what their predicted success is.
And then we have some good advice from two of our participants here. One person is recommending Scioto Gardens as a professional to contact that can actually help you with landscape design if you're interested or like need a little bit of help with the actual design process.
Yeah, I want to say
wonderful, absolutely wonderful, and have a breadth of information as well.
I'm not sure if you mentioned Natives in Harmony too. They are a really wonderful native nursery. We work with them a good deal.
And then another person is recommending that local soil and water conservation districts also host yearly native plant sales. And the next question is, what are your suggestions for native shrubs that are less than 10 feet in a shaded area for a suburban yard?
Ooh.
Oh, this might be a plant giveaway, Holly. What do you think?
An elderberry would be nice. An elderberry would be great, providing some great food resources and fruit resources. Another one of my favorites is Aronia melanocarpa, black chokeberry. Great plant if you're looking for a similar, almost like woody in structure to a shrub. Like I'm thinking of those boxwoods that people all have in their yards that might, you know, have a shape. A melanocarpa, a black chokeberry would be a great one there. And if you're on the wild side, an elderberry would be fabulous, and they make great pies. So if that gets you going,
they are what, you know, people will say a little unruly, but they can handle some really tough pruning. So there's that too.
Yeah, you can't kill it.
And we are going to post the recording of this presentation on the Columbus Audubon website as well in a few days for anyone that missed registering or wants it available on our website. We have a question from Barbara who says, I would think that prairie automatically means a full sun setting, but are there any native prairie type plants that thrive in the shade?
She's right. They most of the species are light loving species. There are a few that are more shade tolerant. Those that come to mind would be Monarda. It's moderately tolerant of shade. Certainly the Rebecchias can be fairly tolerant of shade, and potentially Retivita pinnata. But for the most part, cup plant is another one that if you have a very moist area and you don't mind it taking over, that can be a good choice that does well in shade. But yeah, sunny, you want sun for a good portion of the day at least. It doesn't have to be full sun all day.
All right. Well, that is the last question in the chat currently. Does anybody else have anything out there that you would like to ask our speakers?
Such wonderful questions so far. I've been so impressed. You guys are really thinking. Thank you so much.
All right. We have thanks to our speakers. Um, so if no one has any further questions, I just want to thank Shana and Holly for their time and for this great presentation. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us again. It's been really great to still be able to get together and have these talks on some really great topics. Um, I do just want to plug again that hopefully this presentation gave you all some inspiration for native plants in your backyard. And a really amazing way to start is to join our native plant backyard challenge. You can find the registration on both the GIAC and the CA websites. And we're going to provide you with toolkits and guidance to help you get started, plant sales and a seed bank, opportunity to get native seed. So it will be a really great way to get started out in the new year. All right.
Great New
Well,
Year's resolution.
yeah,
Awesome. I
yeah.
love it. I love it.
What a fantastic project. That's just such a wonderful example. That's exactly the kind of initiatives that we need, and we need people who are excited about carrying them out. So congratulations to Audubon for promoting that.
Yeah.
And thank you again for the invitation to be here. We really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. It was wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. We will see you again in January. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday. Stay safe. And we'll see you next time.